Hello and welcome to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. On this edition of CrossTalk, we consider one question. Is Donald Trump's America First policy in contradiction to the Washington consensus idea of American exceptionalism? The answer to this question will likely define Trump's presidency and change the world in the process. Cross-talking American exceptionalism. I'm joined by my guest, Michael Flanagan in Washington. He is president of Flanagan Consulting and a former congressman. In Charlottesville, we have David Swanson. He is the director of worldbeyondwar.org. And in Northwood, we cross to Indrajit Palmar. He is a professor of international politics at City University, London. All right, gentlemen, crosstalk rules. In effect, that means you can jump in anytime you want, and I always appreciate it. Let me go to David first because he's written a book on the topic titled Curing Exceptionalism. Okay, we have about a year and a half of this presidency. I'm getting a pretty good idea what America First means in the mind of Donald Trump, and I know very well what American exceptionalism is, and I'm not a big proponent of it. Is Donald Trump incompatible with his American First policies with Washington's insistence, and digging their heels in very deep that American exceptionalism must be maintained? Go ahead, David in Charlottesville.
I guess the short answer is no, I don't see it. I look at what Donald Trump does in terms of foreign policy, in terms of continuing U.S. imperialism, and he is dropping more bombs, he is building more bases, he is getting more military spending out of Congress, demanding more military spending out of Europe, shipping weapons to more places, including Ukraine, continuing to insist on the U.S. right to do what it wants in places like Ukraine and Nicaragua and around the world. He's not switching policies, allowing the people of Afghanistan or Nicaragua or anywhere else to decide their own fate. I mean, the changes are all rhetorical and in terms of mannerisms and style. People in people abroad, outside the United States, who see him as radically different because he blurts out things he doesn't act on, like NATO is obsolete, it seems to me as superficial as people within the United States who say the vote in Crimea to rejoin Russia was the big threat to peace and stability and the rule of law of the past centuries. Looking at actions rather than at statements, I don't see it. He's continuing U.S. policy.
Good points made there. Michael, nonetheless, we have the reaction of where you are, the epicenter of the swamp. They see Trump as being very much a threat to the outlook that has been cultivated and enforced, I would point out, since the end of the Second World War, particularly since the end of the Cold War. So, I mean, Michael is right on all these points here, but that's not how the people that used to run the show see it that way, and they're pushing back against him in very peculiar ways, and particularly using the media to push against him. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, I think the swamp has a collectivist view. It definitely denies American exceptionalism writ small, and that is America has the best workers in the world, and we have an exceptional view of our future, and we view ourselves as the shining light of the world. And then you have American exceptionalism writ large, which as a matter of foreign policy means that we'll run the world. I think writ small, Trump is a huge champion of that. Writ large, I think your other guest is correct. He's not a big champion of America run the world in the sense that we will make foreign policy for the world, but we will behave any way we need to protect our security, and that is often irrespective of what Nicaragua wants or what anybody else wants. And I think Trump is definitely a proponent of that. The swamp would rather have us collectively sit with the European powers, basically, Europe almost exclusively, and discuss what we need to do around the world while we pay the freight and they make the decisions. And I think Trump is trying to bring an end to that by threatening NATO, not as an institution like Eisenhower did, by the way, in his presidency, yep, but to say that it's not an organization that we're going to support exclusively and move on forward with.
Combined what we've just heard from Michael and David, so America First and American Exceptionalism, they've defined the worst possible elements of both, and they're being combined. That's what I've gotten from this conversation so far. Go ahead in Northwood.
I don't think I would violently disagree with the two colleagues that you've just spoken with. I think American exceptionalism is a particular kind of nationalism, and that nationalism has attached to it a great sense of a uniqueness and superiority. And to a large degree, it's also backed by power. But it's power behind certain kinds of values. And I think where President Trump probably differs from his predecessors, like President Obama and George W. Bush as well, is that in a way he's rejected the rhetoric of values, of democracy, of human rights, and promoting those kinds of liberal values in favor of naked power. So I would say that that's the principal difference between those two. There is also a strategic disagreement as well, and I think that largely is around the relationship that the United States, or President Trump, is building with Russia, and the bigger geopolitical picture, I think, which he has in his mind, possibly urged by Henry Kissinger, the former Secretary of State, about some kind of a possible Russian-Chinese split. And I think there's a big disagreement about that, but that's a strategic question. I think overall, the United States continues to exert its power, but I think the rhetoric around values, I think President Trump doesn't have any time for that. He's much more about asserting raw, hard power of the dollar, of the trade market access, and of the American military.
Okay, well, David, I mean, I guess in a way Trump is probably more honest than his predecessors because he doesn't talk about democracy promotion as, but that has always been a cover. I think only people in the swamp actually believe in that rhetoric anymore, forcefully bringing democracy to the world. I don't see where it works. No one's ever empirically proven it to me. But so really it's the same thing. It's American exceptionalism with just a different rhetoric. I guess, that makes a lot of sense. Go ahead, David.
That's exactly right. The rhetoric has changed a lot more than the substance. The disagreement between the Make America Great Again people and the America Already Is Great people is not around the need for the United States to have double standards and a set of laws only for itself and superiority to the rest of the world. That is universally agreed upon in Washington. The disagreements are around rhetoric, around domestic policies, and around Russia. And the demand from the Democrats, I wouldn't dignify it by calling it strategic. It's more trying to explain Hillary Clinton's loss and hating anything Trump does. So if he threatens North Korea, that's crazy. If he fails to threaten Russia, that's crazy. The disagreement is around this mythical story of the evil deeds of Russia and their gargantuan significance in the context of the good U.S. law-abiding behavior. And there, you can give Trump credit for refusing to bow to the Russia-gators. Otherwise, I give him very little credit for anything thus far as he continues disastrous policies that are taking this country and the rest of the world over a cliff. Again, but
the rhetoric is certainly different, but and some of the actions are too. I mean, I don't think any of us really took seriously that there would be a meeting with Kim so soon. Nothing much came of it, and now he wants to meet with the Iranian leader days before in capital letters on Twitter threatening it. I mean, Michael, how do you explain that? Or is that just expediency, the midterms, it's just the here and now, and worry about the implications later? Because, I mean, from the outside looking in, this is very confusing, and we're supposed to be experts to be able to figure this stuff out. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, I think one of the hallmarks of Trump's foreign policy is that it's Trump. It's not a collective view of the State Department with weigh-ins from DOD and other places and intelligence. It's Trump. And he's proven to be fairly adept at it so far. However you may or may not like the outcomes, he's gotten in with Korea. He's reworked trade agreements in Europe and elsewhere. Some of it has been to our total benefit. Some of it has been a conciliatory benefit. We enjoy a relationship with China we haven't had in maybe ever. I don't know that what he's doing is confusing bad, evil, wrong, or fattening, but what I do know is that it's in his head and it's been working thus far on the talking diplomatic level. And so I'm not prepared to throw it over just because I don't understand it.
No,
I get your point with that, which I don't understand.
I get your point. Yeah, I get your point. I mean, the way he sees the world here and his base. And I think, let me go back to Northwood here. It seems to me, even a year and a half in, Donald Trump doesn't have a lot of interest in foreign policy. He's made a group of promises on the stump, and he's committed to realizing each one of them. I've never seen a president so adamant going through his checklist, okay? Is it really his idea of American exceptionalism, American first? Is it really domestic politics driving it for him?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, there is a very, very great interest in domestic politics, and he has made a whole load of promises. And as you say, I think the first thing that Steve Bannon did when he entered the White House as his advisor was to put up a whiteboard and put a whole load of lists of promises made and start ticking them off. But I think the foreign policy perspective that President Trump has is one of increasing American power and extracting as much value economically, commercially, financially, and so on from allies, associated powers, and from enemies. And I think all that is down to his long-term idea that America has been ripped off.
Yeah.
And I think if you look at domestic politics, then the kind of people he defines as core Americans, he basically is selling them the same message, that you have been ripped off, white American men in particular, by women, by minorities, by immigrants, and so on, and you've lost status. And what he's going to do is restore American greatness. And
I'm going to jump in here,
American
gentlemen.
male at home and American hard power abroad.
I have a hard break
there
here.
Is a sort of,
after a short break, we'll continue our discussion on American exceptionalism. Stay with our team. Welcome back to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter LaBelle. To remind you, we're discussing American exceptionalism. Okay, David, you know, ever since Trump entered the Oval Office, a lot of us have been trying to understand if there's a rhyme or reason to his foreign policy. And I think that even on this program, it's kind of coming together. It seems to me it's kind of like going back to the 19th century great powers competition without all the values that were pushed since the Second World War. It just really kind of brute power and advantage and looking for competitive advantage. And it's very brusque, and it seems to appeal, just as Interjit pointed out to us in the first part of the program, it does appeal to his base. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I think, you know, it appears to be all Donald Trump, but just as, you know, Reagan and Gorbachev came out of the meeting and were told by their advisors, no, you can't get rid of nuclear weapons. Every time Trump has a good idea, like get rid of NAFTA or get rid of NATO, he talks to his advisors and it's off the table. I think that, you know, actually an actual break with U.S. exceptionalism is not on the agenda of Donald Trump or his advisors. I mean, it would look like joining the International Criminal Court, joining the Convention on the Rights of the Child. I mean, the United States is party to fewer major human rights treaties than almost any other nation on earth. It would mean giving up the veto at the United Nations. It would mean getting out of Afghanistan. There's a promise I'd like Trump to keep. I mean, this is a guy who promised no more of these wars and bomb their family, you know, kill their families, bomb the bleep out of them. So it's easy to say he's keeping his promise because he promised black and white, but the ones I'd like him to keep, he's not keeping, as well as, you know, a few like building the wall and locking up Hillary that I don't necessarily need him to keep either. But, you know, this is a guy who thinks he's running the world, and it's dangerous to what extent he is, but he's not overruling the weapons dealers or the big players in Washington, D.C.
You know, yeah, Michael, that seems to be very contradictory, because he said in interviews that the United States shouldn't be the policeman of the world, but in fact it remains the same, okay? And particularly, you know, I mean, you look at the Korean Peninsula. I mean, a peace between the Koreas, denuclearization, maybe the American troops could go home, there'd be no reason for them to be there. And then the entire foreign policy elite has their hair on fire like, oh my God, peace, don't let it break out. It'll change our world, okay? I mean, it seems to me that he's just going really up against against the stream there. And he keeps coming out with these ideas. I mean, like I said earlier, I mean, threatening Iran in the most coarse way, and then say, oh, I'd like to meet with no preconditions. I mean, the outside looking in finds that very, very confusing. I mean, the Iranians have already said through their aides is that why would we sit down with someone that a country that broke a treaty that we just signed only a few years ago? I mean, how does that show America leading? Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, well, it wasn't a treaty, and they didn't sign anything. But that's a semantic problem we have with the Iranians.
Well, it's an international agreed. I mean, it's multilateral. It wasn't just with the Americans. Okay, go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But I think the point you're making is good, and it's correct. But it stops, and I think that's what we have to focus on, is that the goals, his foreign policy goals, are, as the professor correctly observed, although I think for reasons different than he observes it, and that is that we are interested in better trade, we are interested in exercising our trade power and to increase American presence and wealth at home, American exceptionalism, America first, through trade treaties, through trade work, as opposed to naked aggression and use of foreign power, which other presidents have used. Obama was soundly criticized on the right for wanting to meet with the Iranians with no preconditions. I find it interesting that my brothers on the right don't have a problem with Trump doing the same thing. I just throw that out as an observation.
Well, Michael, hang on, Michael. I mean, in the same week, basically threatening hostilities with Iran and then saying you want to meet with preconditions. You don't have to worry about your friends on the left or right. You have to try to figure out what the president is talking about. Okay, that's my point. Okay.
Well, this was the same. Your point is right, but this is the same tactic we took with North Korea. Little Kim, Rocket Man, blah, 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 terrible person, going to blow you off the face of the earth, you're going to blow us off the face of the earth. Next thing you know, we're meeting in Singapore. This is the art of the deal. This is a part of the tactics of moving forward. This is part of the noise involved in making the deal, in making the negotiation and doing the work. And it's Trump. He's unique. He is rare. He is something we haven't seen before. The swamp can't make head or tail out of him, and nor can anyone else. And this goes back to my earlier point, which was just buckle up, just as you've observed many times, Peter, buckle up, and you're just going to have to wait to see how it boils out. And the swamp will do their best to keep their arm around it. I just don't know how it's going to work out.
Okay, brace for impact. Okay, Indrajit, let me go back to you here. Yeah. Then, okay, so what is the justification for the United States being in Afghanistan? It's not bringing democracy there anymore, apparently. What's the justification for the illegal behavior of the United States in Syria? Is it bringing democracy there anymore? It's not, apparently, so why are they still there? See, I mean, this makes it very patently obvious it's just brute force beyond international law. This is what Trump is opening up to. Go ahead.
Well, I think, when we look at the big picture of global change, we have a whole range of new emerging powers, some of which are very, very powerful economically and increasingly powerful militarily. And they're looking around the world for resources, and they're looking to increase their influence in order to protect their lines of communication. China, for example, is building the One Belt, One Road initiative, which is going to be kind of right across from China all the way to Spain and in through the Indian Ocean. You've got non-state actors like ISIS and other organizations also challenging and destabilizing allies and other regimes as well. And I think what really President Trump is trying to do is effectively grapple with the same problem which post-Cold War presidents have tried to outline, which is the whole world environment has changed. The big difference, I think, with President Trump is he doesn't really look at the idea of hegemony, of building an orderly system or an ordered, rules-based system, or rather he wants to open it up, he wants to loosen it up, and he wants to make it more transactional. So I think what he's trying to do is say, look, we've got this big international series of regimes. America's been ripped off, it's paying too much, it has too many large deficits with everybody. And what we're going to do is we're going to flex our national strength and try to renegotiate our position within it and effectively subordinate everybody else.
Okay,
And
well,
that's actually the big grand plan.
okay, well, again, like I said, it looks like it's going back to the great powers of the 19th century without all of the rhetoric. At least it's more transparent. David, you mentioned Russia. Is it really worth it for Trump to go down this path? We had the Helsinki summit. I was critical of the president's delivery at the press conference, like I was in Singapore as well. It's not his forte. He's got to work on his game there. And then he wanted another summit and then walked it back. The Russians invited him to Moscow. Why is this so important to him? Is it a campaign promise, or is it just, you know, the media hates it when he does it, and that he just pushes back to show that I am president and I'm going to do what I want to do? Well, what is his fascination here? Go ahead, David.
Well, I think there is all kinds of pressure on him to meet with and work with Russia and to not do so, and to treat Russia as having attacked the United States and started a war, and to engage in war with Russia and everywhere in between. I think that it's appropriate that the United States and Russia, as the major nuclear weapons powers, meet and get rid of those damn things before they destroy us. I think it's critical for the United States and Russia, as two of the nations doing the most to destroy our natural environment, to meet and start reversing those policies.
David,
that's not so much of the agenda. Maybe
I'm in complete agreement with you, and I'm going to stay with David here.
Yeah.
Why? It seems to me that Trump's engagement with Russia should come out very clear. Twitter is fine with me. I need to deal with Vladimir Putin to sign a new arms control agreement. It's about to expire in 2021. This is what's most important to all of humanity. Why can't he just write that? I mean, that is very straightforward. And you know what, David? It's transactional, what Trump is supposed to be all about. Go ahead, David.
Well, it would make perfect sense. It would fit with some of his agenda, but it is not where he comes from. It's not something he knows anything about. It's not something he's hired anybody to keep around him who would advise him to do. And he's got the U.S. media and the Democrats and half the public screaming at him not to do anything cooperative with Russia, even if it kills us all.
Yeah.
So it's not shocking that he hasn't come out with that position. But he should. He damn well should. And the world and Russia should be pushing him in that direction.
Okay. All right, Michael. I mean, where does he go from this, from his Russia gambit now? I mean, he's put it off until next year. Is that because of the midterms? It's because he can't do anything transactional? Because just like David said, perfect, crystal clear. Even trying to save humanity, he's the boogeyman. Donald Trump is evil incarnate, even if he wants to save humanity. That's a problem in the United States. That's a problem with American exceptionalism. 40 seconds to you, Michael, my friend. Last word.
Real quick, and I promise to stay inside my time lot. Trump never telegraphs what he's going to do. He'll make promises in a campaign context. He'll allude to things in a domestic policy context, but he's never going to say up front what he's going to do. It's one of his huge criticisms of his predecessors. And so because he hasn't said it's there, doesn't mean it's not going to be there. And he's had some surprises foreign policy-wise of stuff no one expected, but it was always part of his design. And I think that we just have to buckle up and wait.
Well, you know, that's why I call you one of my Donald Trump Sherpers. That was a very good answer. I like that. That's all the time we have, gentlemen. Many thanks to my guests in Washington, Charlottesville, and in Northwood. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time, and remember, crosstalk rules.